everyone, welcome to Film Formula. So a while back, Mr. Matt Clemens suggested I do a video on Martin Scorsese, and I've done it! It's not the most famous Scorsese film, in fact it's quite obscure, but it's one of my favorites. After Hours is a seemingly simple story of one man's journey back home, taking place over the course of a single night. The events unfolding during this night become more and more strange until they take almost Lynchian proportions. The script by Joseph Minion is rich with symbolism, most obviously with its overt homage to The Wizard of Oz.
Wizard of Oz? Yeah, I've seen it.
Well, when we made love, whenever when he came, he would just scream out, "Surrender, Dorothy."
But also with its subtle imagery alluding to the underworld, as it pertains to Greek mythology. So why The Wizard of Oz? Well, to start, both protagonists are desperate to go back home.
Oh, but I want to go home now!
Dorothy to her sepia-toned Kansas, and Paul Hackett to his beige living room and workplace. How did they become separated from their homes in the first place? Dorothy through a tornado, and Paul through a taxi ride that could have been shot any other way, but was shot like a tornado. In fact, the wind plays a huge part in Paul's inability to return home as it blows all his money out the window. To get home, Dorothy must follow the yellow brick road. There's no obvious yellow brick road in After Hours, but there's an inordinate amount of yellow, especially decorating the kindly women he encounters, who at first seem to be helping him return home. There is, of course, also the iconic yellow cab, which is Paul's first and preferred way of transport. Both Paul and Dorothy start off in a drab world and end up in a colorful one. Dorothy wishes to escape her troubles somewhere over the rainbow, and Paul ends up in Julie's colorful apartment, which is decorated by a rainbow. She even asks him to tell her all his troubles.
Just let it go, honey. Tell me your problems.
I thought I was looking too deep into the rainbow thing. I mean, rainbows are pretty and it's probably a common decorating theme, but then I noticed there seems to be another rainbow by the door. Also, they're not blue, but there are some birds in Julie's apartment. They both end up back in their drab worlds at the end of the movie. There is some debate surrounding this, but I think the common interpretation of The Wizard of Oz was that it was all a dream, since she wakes up back in Kansas on her bed. The same argument could be made about After Hours, because in a very surrealistic moment, Paul enters his office after all the events of last night and his computer says, "Good morning, Paul." Dorothy presumably fell asleep when the window ledge hit her head, and Paul could have fallen asleep during his co-worker's boring monologue.
Because what I really want to do is, I'd really like to get into publishing. You know, there just aren't any openings right now, but what I would love to do is just create a magazine, my own magazine.
We already see him zoning out, and when he leaves work, it seems like everyone else is only in the middle of their day. There are actually several clues as to the dreamlike nature of Paul's journey. In one scene, Paul recounts his traumatic experience in the Bourne unit as a child.
They didn't have enough room in pediatrics, so they had to put me in the burn ward.
Which could explain his excessive fear of and preoccupation with fire throughout the film.
I'm not afraid of anything. Except a lighted match.
A newspaper article also appears in the film describing a man being torn apart by a mob, which soon becomes Paul's personal concern. And we all know how some random things we read during the day can make its way into our nightmares. Besides, there is a newspaper lying on Paul's desk at the beginning of the movie. Moreover, as a word processor, Paul's workplace is set up as a place where papers and their organization reign supreme, which manifests in his dream as a desire to acquire
The plaster of Paris bagel and cream cheese paperweight.
to keep all the chaos in order. Paul also mentions that he's rereading Miller's Tropic of Cancer, which is odd because he doesn't usually reread things.
I'm just rereading it. I don't reread books that often, but I don't know, this one's my favorite.
Well, perhaps he's not rereading it, but rather living it in his dream. Indeed, Paul's series of encounters with different women is not entirely unlike Miller's encounters with the women of Tropic of Cancer. And who hasn't had a scenario of a novel they've read pop into their dream? There's also a lot of evidence to suggest that Paul's journey to Soho can be seen as an allegory to his descent into the underworld. Not to mention that Soho is an inherently more chaotic and bustling place as opposed to Paul's residence in the Upper East Side, and heading to Soho requires going south or down. Besides all the motifs of fire and burning, death is also rampant, from the newspaper article to Marcy's suicide, to the murder of the random man in the building across the street. This is not to mention the constant imagery of skulls, from bar decoration to the bartender's keychain to Marcy's tattoo, even to Gail's belt decoration. The streets of Soho can be seen as the river Styx, the river connecting our world to the underworld in Greek mythology. Indeed, it is always wet with mist or water. At one point, a broken fire extinguisher actively contributes to the stream. I thought I was thinking too much about it, but the diner he visits is called River. It's actually an atemporal place, and where the owner says,
different rules apply when it gets this late, you know what I mean? It's like after hours.
The first time he goes there with Marcy, it's about 2 in the morning. The next time, it's 4, which is cutting it close considering everything that went down in between, but still not entirely unreasonable. But the next time he visits, it's 12, but it can't be noon because it's still dark out. There's no way this can be a blooper considering Scorsese will even make sure the time on Paul's watch matches the clock, so it must have been intentional. The burger and coffee, served seemingly hours after it had been ordered, only confirms that. The ferryman of Hades, Chiron, supposedly carries souls across a river from the land of the living to the world of the dead. He is said to have flashing eyes, and you know who else has flashing eyes? Even though he's a cab driver, his cap reads captain as though he's manning a ship. If the soul is unable to pay Chiron for the fare, he'll be stuck roaming the river Styx indefinitely, and this is what happens to Paul. He loses his cab fare in a gust of wind, which is pretty funny because the whole scenario could have been avoided if only he had a paperweight.
I want to see a plaster of Paris bagel and cream cheese paperweight. Now cough it up. Because as we sit here chatting, there are important papers flying rampant around my apartment because I don't have anything to hold them down with.
The bar Paul goes to is called the Terminal Bar, which could represent the end of life. Besides the prominent skull, there's also a stuffed crocodile, which is an aquatic creature. Okay, at this point, I definitely thought I was looking too deep into it, but then I noticed there are also some snakes on this wall. In the bar bathroom, Paul stares at a drawing of a shark biting a man's penis. When he comes out, it says ladies prominently here, and earlier in the subway, it says women there. Combined with Tropic of Cancer, all the women he meets along the way, and the fact that this all started because he was trying to sleep with Marcy, perhaps Paul is stuck in a limbo awaiting judgment for his lust. Now, I don't think there's any moral judgment in this film. Rather, it takes a darkly comedic approach.
Now, he didn't know that I knew that I came down to, his girlfriend.
Though, indeed, the bartender, Tom, has to form a judgment on Paul's character.
You don't know me, I don't know you. Might rip you off, right?
And later on in the film, it is Tom who turns Paul in to the angry mob. Another hero who made it through the underworld and came out unscathed is Odysseus. Besides sharing the ultimate goal of returning home, Odysseus also seems to have a gaggle of women and goddesses rescuing him from harm, but then they take a liking to him and try to force him to stay for eternity. The witch goddess Circe in particular was said to entrap men by turning them into pigs with wine and cheese, and Julie asks Paul for a drink.
Well, let's go have a drink. Let's celebrate.
All around her bed lie mousetraps with, yes, cheese. Whether the specific allusion is intentional is irrelevant. Paul feels that sex with this woman could entrap him. Upon leaving Calypso's island and finally sailing for home, Poseidon curses Odysseus by casting a storm that wrecks his ship. Likewise, when Paul finally leaves Marcy's apartment, there's a rainstorm outside, which prevents him from taking the most obvious route of walking. In the end, it's Athena and Hermes who bail Odysseus out in a true deus ex machina, which in Greek tragedy literally involves the actors playing God to be lowered onto the stage using a machine. This is what happens to Paul. After being informed that there is truly no way out, the two thieves abruptly break in from the sky and save the day. One of the thieves' jacket even reads, "When I die, I'll go to heaven because I've spent my time in hell." And heaven is where they take Paul after stuffing him in their truck. We see the street numbers increasing as if by magic as they head uptown. When Paul wakes up, it is to the comforting symphony of the word processing office. Once boring, it is now all he wants, just as Dorothy finally learns to love her place in Kansas. You know, I always found it so strange that when Dorothy returns to Kansas, it's still sepia. I mean, if the whole lesson of the film was that happiness comes from within, you'd think she would see Kansas as just as colorful as Oz. Anyway, I had so much fun making this video. I love doing interpretations that are just a little bit crazy. If you have any requests, please send them over and I'll probably do it.